Hi, guys. I'm Sandy Sedmak-Angle. I'm the chairman of the Rittenhouse Square Fine Art Show, and we are here to welcome you to the first Zoom event of the weekend. We are super excited to have Darren Jones with us. Darren is from Chicago, am I correct?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And he is a participating artist in our show. He is a mixed media oil acrylic painter, really inspired by nature. Just started painting, I think, about 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I am now going to go ahead and mute myself and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sandy. I appreciate it. Actually, I'm going to just mute everybody just to let you know that if you have any questions during my presentation, feel free to jump into the chat room and type in any questions. I've got a very handsome assistant here who's going to read them out and we'll interact. And then I figured maybe towards the end, we'll totally open it up for live questions as well. So I'm just going to just mute everybody here and then we'll go. Perfect. So everyone can hear me okay? Perfect. So anyhow, so as Sandy said, welcome to my studio here in Chicago. And thank you for joining my virtual event here for the Rittenhouse Square Fine Art Show. This would be, I believe, my 4th year with the show. And unfortunately, we're not around the square in Philadelphia today, but hopefully this will be kind of a really cool experience for you. So what I thought I would do today for this presentation particularly is just tell you a little bit about me for real quick, show you just a real brief quick tour of the studio, talk about my work, and then I'm actually going to do my hands-on demonstration. So when you signed up, my course was called Painting with My Hands. So that's actually something that I started probably about 12, 13 years ago. I've been painting for a little over 15. And so I don't use paintbrushes. I don't use any technique like that. Everything goes on my hands and everything gets applied onto either the panels or the canvases. So as Sandy said, I've been painting for just over 15 years, but I've been a full-time artist since 2009. So I used to work downtown. I'm just about 10 minutes north of downtown Chicago, worked in an office, corporate life, and started painting on the side. And in 2009, was laid off and decided at that time I was sharing a studio with another artist and decided to just jump in full feet into the water and just keep going full time. And I haven't looked back. So I've now been in this current space, which is my own studio, for the last 6 years. And it's been an amazing journey. So my corporate life is gone and now I paint every day. So it's kind of been fun incorporating sort of my corporate mindset of coming to the studio every day and treating it not just as cool painting, but also, you know, as work. So just to give you a real quick, it might be a little bumpy because I'm using my computer, but I'm going to give you a 2-second tour of the studio and then we'll get to the demonstration, talk about the art. So I've actually set up a virtual booth in my studio. So this is basically what I would have had set up on the square and with all my panels with my art. So this is actually physically within the space. So we'll come in here, move to the front. And so what I try to do with the space is I really create sort of a couple areas. So in the front area, I have my work desk, sort of a little living area, and then all my workspaces in the back. And I purposely do this in the front here, so that way when I have clients come to the studio, they can actually see artwork hanging with a couch, with a desk, and sort of with living space. And that allows them to really kind of picture what that, you know, painting would look like on a wall. Plus it allows me sort of an area to, you know, sit and start thinking again of what I'm working on, taking a mental break from all of that. So then we move into sort of the middle section here, and this is truly where all my workspace is. So these panels here where I've got the booth set up aren't always here. This is usually outdoors for my art shows. So these are sort of 3 areas where I do all my painting. I have the table set up in the center, and then I have multiple stations as well. So I'll bring it back up to the front, sort of where we do this. So this is where the presentation will take place. This is where I'll actually demonstrate working on both these panels, but I'll talk a little bit about my collections first, and then we'll go from here. And I'll set you back down while we do this. So currently I am working on, I have 4 collections. And so my Muskoka series is which are birch and aspen inspired mixed media paintings. My One Can Dream series, which are a mixed media series as well. An Urban Shore, which I don't have showing. And then this new collection called Inner Courage. And the new collection is what I'll show you in the demonstration. And this is work that's all stemmed from while being in quarantine. And so I've been very fortunate enough to stay in the studio, and I work by myself. So I've been able to spend all my time here and working on creating. So I've kind of incorporated all the sort of textures and mediums that I use in all my collections into sort of this. And so to give you an idea, with the Muskoka series, I do the paintings on the wood panels or on the canvases first, and then I apply all the texture work on top. Where I do the reverse with this style work, I layer all the texture on and then I build up the color. And this is where I start to create with all my hand work. So I'm doing everything by hand. So I'm layering, there's shredded paper, there's industrial staples, there's beach sand, plaster, and then there is all the color work that gets applied on. And so with this series, there's anywhere from 30 to 60 layers of color that actually go on. And I'll show you a close-up look of that as well. And so what I've done is taken sort of those concepts, and with the new series is really layered the texture on and really carve into it, use my hands to create all this dynamic movement. And I purposely use my hands as my tools in the sense that I really want to feel my energy actually going onto the panel or onto the canvas. So you'll start to see also with this new collection that I do all the color work actually on the canvas first, build up some texture, then add more color, build up texture, then add up a lot more color. So I thought I'll jump in and we can do some demonstrating right now, and then we can come back and talk a little bit more about the collection and then open up if anybody has any questions. So I'm just going to move this cart here so we can see the painting table. I might adjust that a little bit for you. So you might want to come over here so that you can keep an eye on people coming in the room. So to give you an idea, so these are sort of 2 canvases in 2 various stages. So the first one here, I have actually created a lot of the color and texture first. So on here, the layers of yellows and reds and blues and purples, that was all layered onto the canvas. And then I apply a plaster material, and then there's actually handmade shredded paper that gets layered on. So I'll bring this a little bit closer so you can actually see the depth of the texture. I'll give you kind of an angle so you can see a little more that way. So, and each time the texture goes on, there's always different sort of movements in what's going on. And part of the inspiration where this comes from is I started taking jiu-jitsu 2 years ago. And it's been really cool to see what happens in my brain and the martial art and learning on the mats of what I'm learning and applying it actually onto a canvas. So a lot of the times, a lot of the angles, a lot of the movements is actually my hands taking what I've learned from the mats and actually applying it onto the canvas. So there's a lot of energy and a lot of movement. So from here, this will eventually start to look like this, and this will eventually start to look like the finished piece. So what I thought I would do is I'll show you adding sort of the first dark layer onto this, and then we'll jump over to this one and add some more of the lighter layers. So on the darker one, you'll see I've already actually, you can see a lot of the textures starting to really kind of evolve, and that's because I've really started layering the blues and the whites sort of over top of what you see. So if you compare the two, you can really see the difference on how the color is really starting to develop in on the canvas. So we'll get started here. So I'm going to basically take the first, and we're going to really start to layer sort of the dark color on. So I purposely do a dark color on the first layer of the texture, because what that really does is changes the depth of how you see the lines, you see the ridges, everything coming out. And I purposely try not to cover everything because obviously I want the underlying layers to really, you know, jump out and really speak to you. So basically, these, as I said, are my tools, and I use a lot of water, and then I use the acrylic paints. So I'm always painting with acrylic because I paint with my hands, so it's easier to obviously wash up and clean up. So what I do, feel like a little bit like I'm on a cooking show. So basically, I take whatever color I'm working on, and it gets applied onto my hands. And depending on how much I want to stay on, I take the water and then I truly start to blend it on. So it'll start to, you can see, will start to cover, and I have to work it quite a bit because of all the texture and the layer underneath. If I just leave it at that moment, there now starts to look like there's brush strokes and different movement, whereas I really want to have that smoothed out. So as it continues, I'll just slowly add more paint to the hands, add more water. So this process will happen to the entire canvas. So I'll keep going and we can keep talking as I do it. And what we'll do is basically it'll eventually be completely covered sort of in the black. And as you can see, probably a little harder from the camera angle, but using the dark color first really allows the underlaying colors to start to pop. So you're really starting to see that purple come through. You're really starting to see the yellow and the red come through. So it's really kind of a cool way to bring some of those underlying layers sort of to the front. And then the more water, if I said this already, the more water I apply to my hands, the more fluid the paint is, and it'll blend a lot more. I can spread it out a lot more. However, it makes it a lighter color. So rather than being sort of that true dark black, the more water I add to it, it'll become more of a lighter gray color. So we'll kind of move through and get this covered up. And then truly depending on, you know, as I create these pieces, because they're inspired by my martial art work, and as well as a lot of my work is landscape inspired, that sometimes I have a direction and a feeling of what the final outcome is supposed to be. And then other times what's really cool is that the painting does some things on its own as I layer the colors on, and it actually changes my direction on what actually I'm doing. So for instance, as I'm layering this dark black color on it, it might start to change how the greens and the purples look. And because of that, it might change what my brain tells me to do as sort of the final layer of colors. So we'll just kind of get probably about 3 more handfuls here, and then I will jump to the other canvas. So like I said, it's really important that I smooth out over all the color that gets added so that you really have such a smooth texture and you don't have the lines, so it doesn't look like a paintbrush was used on. I do have to say you're getting an actually cool sneak peek as I paint alone, and I normally don't have anyone in the studio while I'm working. So not too many people actually get to see this process, which is a lot of fun to do. I don't think I have fingerprints left anymore, but the price you pay for being an artist. So now, as this finishes up, basically what I usually do is this needs to dry before I put the next layer on. And I purposely do that so that each color really stays true to what the color is. However, if I want more blending feel, I will actually add another color on while this is wet. So for now, this will dry, and then it will get probably, based on if I'm gonna continue to be like the other one, this will probably get another 30 layers of color that actually go on. So I'm gonna jump to the next one, where I'll show you. Now, normally I'd run up front to my sink and wash my hands, but I don't wanna waste time doing that. So I'm just gonna use the water here, some paper towels. Just make sure everybody's good. Like if you wanna if you go in the participant there, if you wanna unmute, that way anyone wants to chime in while I'm doing this, I'm more than happy to chat while I'm working. So as you can see, basically what I did with the black on this one, it's obviously a little darker palette than what is on the table, but it's the same concept. So this is where this was just basically a day ago. So now what I do is I really start to build the underlying layers that really will show through when I start to finish. So basically what I'm doing with this one now is going to go with a dark blue, which will then go to a white. And so the concept on this now is that I'm really going to use the water to really loosen up the paint, because the effect I want is to have almost a dripping feel. And my hand should be dry enough. I'm gonna actually take you over and show you. So this is actually one of the finished pieces. So you can see here. So what I'm working on now is taking this sort of texture and the dripping feel that you feel. That's gonna be the layer that I'm gonna work on here. Oh, what time it is, babe? All right, so I'm working with a color, it's called Payne's Gray, which is obviously in the gray family, but it has a blue sort of hue to it, almost a steel color. And so for this part, I really have to get my hands wet. So there's a lot of water involved. And then I literally start basically smacking the canvas. And what I've kind of developed, this is sort of a technique I kind of developed during quarantine, and I was just experimenting and playing around with a canvas, and turned out to be a really cool effect. And what I love about it is I just keep adding paint to my hands, keep adding more water, and I just keep layering this way. So as I layer, then I go up to the top with more water. Add more paint to my hands. Ooh. And sometimes that happens. Luckily, I have really lovely neighbors who don't mind the noise on the walls when I do this every once in a while. So as you can see now, the paint is slowly starting to drip. And so what I do is now I add more water. And I really let the canvas do its own thing. So I hope it drips in certain spots, but sometimes it'll do something really cool on its own. So as you can see, the paint now really starts to run down the canvas. So I'm trying to get that effect of almost like rain on a window on a sort of not a stormy day, but on one of those days where the rain just really is constant. And by using this technique with the water, it really lets the paint kind of just get this sort of really cool effect on it. And then I start to actually throw the paint on to give almost a droplet sort of feel. So now while doing this really happens, I'll probably do this about 10 times in different colors. So depending on what sort of my final vision of what I want this piece, what I want the underlying color to truly stand out and be, that's going to determine which layers sort of go next. So usually I like doing something dark, underlaying, then bring in the whites, bring in some lighter colors, and then move from there to whether I go into the patinas, or if I go into the grays, or if I go into some greens. The cool thing with experimenting during this challenging time, I've really started to play with some colors that I've always used in the studio. They've always been more an underlying color, and I've actually started to use them as predominant colors. So red is normally something that I have in all my pieces, but it's always sort of underneath, and it's not sort of the major color. Whereas if you go on the show site, the website gallery for the show, for Rittenhouse, I have a really predominant red piece, and then I'll show you one that I've got hanging on the wall as well. So now basically at this point, this is where I sort of stand back, I look and see, all right, is there something that I'm not happy with? Is there something that's, you know, collecting? So I kind of have a dark spot sort of in this area that I kind of want to just sort of lighten up a bit. So I'll bring a little bit more water in, and I'll kind of change the direction of how the paint flows. And the cool part is that I've, with my fingers, carved into all the texture. So you see all these lines, and that's why when the paint drips, it doesn't always actually go in an even direction down. It might catch part of the texture and then start to veer off, and then a water droplet from here now ends up into the sort of the far right corner. So I'm gonna let that sit for a minute, and then we'll show you doing it in white on the other. And then I'll have to show you what the floor looks like here. Luckily, I have these great cement floors. I'm in an old, just to give you an idea where I'm at. So I'm in a neighborhood called Ravenswood in Chicago. And this neighborhood used to be sort of a small town when the city was smaller and contained to downtown. And the building I'm in is part of a company called the Mans Corporation. And I'm in a 6-story warehouse. I have full view of downtown, the city. It's a really, really fantastic view. It's too gray, I can't show you today, but I'm connected. It's a whole city block long of these old warehouse and executive buildings. Well, this used to be, so I said Mans Corporation. This is the former publishing firm for Esquire magazine and Playboy magazine back in the day when they were headquartered here. And so the floor I'm on is actually where the printing presses were. So these are solid concrete floors. I've got the cement pillars. And so it's really cool as an artist to be able to sort of, as I was demonstrating, letting this paint just fall. Because I have these concrete floors, they allow me to have no problem doing, you know, whatever I want to sort of do. So I'm gonna switch this one back to the black one. If I can have you grab that. And I'm gonna switch to doing a lighter layer just so that you can see, probably the darker layer might have been a little harder to see as I washed it on. So we're now going sort of with this really pale bluish color. And again, this is going to be sort of the same technique that I used. And by doing this, it really creates almost like a cloud-like effect with the water as it gets layered onto sort of each panel. And as I move through, the more water that gets added, the more it will run down. And depending on how much I want to actually have the canvas covered is how much more paint I put on my hands. So if I want this just to really be a sort of an accent as it falls through, I'm not really going heavy on the paint on my hands. As this starts to dry, it really creates almost a foggy effect. And it just really allows the underlying colors to show through and not fight with each other and really sort of complement each other. So we'll do just a little bit more on here. You know, and for me, as I don't think I really mentioned at the beginning of this, so I have been painting for over 15 years, but I'm a self-taught artist. So I actually went to university for my degree in political science and my degree in business. And here I am, 51 years later, being a full-time artist. And, you know, so for me, it's all about experimenting. It's all about trying new techniques. It's all about trying something that you might not have been taught or you were told not to do and see sort of how it goes. So with this, because this was the layer that I showed you just a little bit ago with the black that went on, the blue is actually blending with the black. So it's now becoming more gray-like and it's actually washing. So I'm getting a really cool effect, which I'll bring the camera a little closer so you can see, because obviously from the distance, you're not really getting to sort of see that. So as the blues are mixing with the blacks, you're really starting to get this really cool gradation of almost a gray color. And because I allowed the blue to go on while the black was still drying, it really starts to mix. And now another thing that I've done, and it was just kind of by chance, and this was actually the beginning of quarantine, as the water drips and as it falls down, just as it's drying, I can take my hand and again, go over it, and it actually takes away the color that was applied on, but leaves a shadow effect. So it's almost like I had a piece of tape on here and I've ripped it off and I painted over top of the paint. So you really get this sort of cool effect. So it almost looks like as if the blue was dripping, but now the blue's gone and you sort of have this gray sort of shadow effect. It really works well when you've done a really, really dark layer while it's dry, do a really light layer like white and then wash it off really quickly. And that's really sort of where you're gonna get that effect. So from this point, I probably add a little bit more of the blue here. I feel like it's shadowed off a little bit. And then from here, this is where a little voice in my head and I have conversations while we work and sort of decide where this is gonna go. So I might have, when I started this process, thought I really want this to be gray based. I really want this to be blue. I really want the red to show through. I might have that in mind. However, as I said earlier, that changes as the layers go on. So at this point, this is where I'm really starting to see what's going on the canvas. And it talks to me in the sense that, okay, maybe I'm not liking this dark gray here to be the finished product, so I need to lighten it up, or I need to add a different color sort of altogether. And for me, this is where the gradation will start as well. So on a lot of my work, you'll see, and I'm going to show you in a few minutes with the finished ones, I use either an ivory or a white that gets washed completely. So there's a really soft feel, and that's sort of done on purpose because for me, all my work, I really want as busy as it is and as much texture and as much layers that are on each one, I really want it to have a calming effect. I really want it to have a soothing effect. So there's not, I really don't want you to be jarred by when you see it, especially even when I paint with the red as the predominant color, that it really, you know, still is soothing, and it's still, you know, still has that calming effect. So this is going to dry, and while this dries, the other one's still drying as well. I thought I'd just show you a little bit of sort of the finished ones and kind of talk through. And like I said, feel free to jump in if you have any questions at any time. It's 10:30. All right. So like I said, normally I'd be running back and forth. So my sink is all the way at the very front of the studio. So I'm always usually washing my hands in between each layer, only because I've had the moments where I might not have gotten, as you can see here, not all the paint off my hands, and I'll start the next color, and the next color might be white. And suddenly as it's being added, I'm getting a blue in that I didn't want. And one, it might be a really cool effect, and now it's now going to be a fun part of the painting, or it's going to be something that I've got to quick, you know, adjust. And for me, I started out as an oil painter, and I miss the smell of oils in the studio. However, I switched to acrylic because I love the challenge of working with acrylic to make it look like an oil painting, having that heavy weight. But the dry time obviously is a lot different. If this painting was an oil painting, by the time it was done, it would take a good several months before it was even able to be moved and to dry. So let me walk you back over and show you sort of where these two that I've been demonstrating on, how they are actually going to look. So if you can turn the light back on, just the power button. So these are 30 by 30 versions of what I'm working on. So the ones I'm working on are 36 by 48. So as you can see, this is where all the texture and all the layers really come into play. And you can see, hopefully you can see on the camera, this is where the washing starts to take an effect. So you'll see a little dot of red here. You'll see a little dot of purple here. Well, that canvas was completely washed in that color at one point. So with this series, this is the series, as I mentioned in the beginning, that I started off developing while I've been in quarantine here in the studio. And I've kind of come up with a couple of different styles. So I've actually framed a few, and as well as then here is the larger one that you'll see. So you can really see how the texture is just cut into the canvas, and how you really can see the different layers that sort of move in. So with this one, because this was sort of a morph of my Inner Courage series, that it really kind of takes on, as I said before, what I've been learning in the other ones. And so I'm going to show you here, my One Can Dream series is a series that I've been doing for probably 6 years. I started it when I moved into this studio, and it's a combination of industrial staples, beach sand, grid lines. There's shredded paper, which I have an abundance of. It's always fun to play with. So these are my studio bills. This is my bank statements. These are everything that I've done to work on here in the studio and put it to good use. And the cool part is I use the paper to create these really fun grid lines. And the grid lines were inspired when I moved into this new space by my view of downtown. So you can see the actual line work that's been done here. And then the industrial staples and the beach sand. And then, like I said, the color gets layered on exactly how I did with the demonstration. So not as much of the wash effect as more the colors really get put on. And so those panels will at one point be all red, then all blue, then all white, and then I build it up. And the cool part with that series is it was inspired by this really cool old telephone pole that I saw when we were in Mykonos, Greece, and walked by it 100 times and never noticed it. One night after lots of wine and dinner with friends, we were walking back to the hotel, and I was stopped in my tracks, and there was this old pole, and it was covered in staples and fibers and paper, and it was painted over probably 1,000,000 times, and it was a sculpture, but it was lit, and I had never noticed it until that point. It just stopped me in my tracks. And at that point, I was truly only doing my tree series at the time. So it took me about 6 months to come up with the concept. And so I still take the linearness of what I used in the lines as far as the industrial staples, and there's an actual rhythm to them. I use the numbers 5, 3, and 1, which represent my family, which is 5. I'm 3 of siblings, and then 1 being me as the artist. And so it's really kind of been really fun to morph these into sort of the landscape feels. So while this one dries, I'm going to bring the other dark one back up and just show you real quick. I know we're probably getting close to the end of my time. Oh, and I really wanted to show you, sorry for all the movement of the camera, but this is where I really wanted to show you. So that's my floor. So it just really, I wish I could actually carve up the concrete to actually make a painting out of it, because it would be a lot of fun. So I'm just going to do a little bit of white, and then I know we're coming up to 40 minutes, so I want to make sure I can save a little time. So if anyone has any questions. Hopefully by doing the white, you're going to actually see this effect happen even more as I do it. And because I'm flaring it on that dark blue that you witnessed me do a little bit ago, it's actually turning into more of a gray tone, which is really a pretty tone. And this is where the paints talk to each other and really come up with their own color that I might not have even thought to blend myself. Let's just get a little more here. Every once in a while I do it, you'll get a big chunk of paint that sort of stays, and I'll either adjust it, or sometimes it really makes a cool effect and almost looks like an underlying color when we're wrapping up with that. Let me just dry my hands off real quick. So with the One Can Dream series, really the same technique that I'm demonstrating with the Inner Courage series. The only difference is they're on wood panel because of the industrial staples, but the same thing is done. So I actually layer the paper, the sand, the plaster, everything is layered on by hand. Oh, we have a, everything's done by hand. So the One Can Dream series, however, because of the industrial staples in the sand, the first few layers are very massaging on my hands because it's just a great texture. However, once I'm working on multiple pieces of them, it really starts, I've cut my hands on them before, and so sometimes I can only do a few and can only add a few layers to that. So before we wrap up, I know we still have a little time, I want to just show you my Muskoka series. So my Muskoka series are the tree pieces that I was showing you at the very beginning. And these are really been a staple of my artist career for the 15 years. I started doing sort of floral work and tree work, but just to sort of wrap up, I kind of want to show is something my clients don't let me not do. They've loved them. So it's the reverse of what I've been demonstrating by doing the paint on top of the texture. This is the texture on below. So just real quick show So this is where I've created depth. So the painting is done again by hand. The tree work is the only thing I use a palette knife with. The beach sand's mixed in, but then I use a fiber process of recycled wood fibers, dried leaf fibers, and paper fibers, and that gets molded over the canvas. So what it really does is it brings out this really fun texture, and it changes the depth of the trees. And so I'm always asked, are they birch or are they aspen? And it's always kind of fun for me because I know if you ask it's birch, you're from the East Coast. If you're asking if they're aspen, you're from the West Coast. They're actually a hybrid of both. So the originals were birch inspired because I'm Canadian, so I grew up in Ontario. However, we go out west and I do a show out in Aspen, I do a show out in Crested Butte and parts of Utah, and I just get lost. What's really great is I do the shows on the weekend and then I get time to go hike and get lost in the forest. So I really take the linearness of the aspen forest out there. So those are really all my collections. I really hope you've enjoyed this, Sandy. Are we good on time? I think we're.
Yeah, we've got, I was going to say whatever kind of trees they are absolutely stunning.
Thanks, thank you.
Yeah, we've got just a couple minutes. We need to wrap it up at 11:45.
Okay, and then I'll show you. Oh, someone's just.
Oh, I just let him in and we're good.
Okay, and then I'll actually show as I showed you on the canvas, these are the actual sculptural version of the same. So these are actually all hand done on individual pieces of wood to give you more of a sculptural painting feel versus the canvas. So I started those probably about 9 years ago, but the canvas I've been doing for about 15. So, but I don't know if anyone has any questions. I know people have piped in on the chat to say hi and no, all right. Well, I really do appreciate it. So if, obviously if you go to the RittenhouseSquareArt.com, you'll see the gallery that has 4 of my pieces for sale. You also can obviously come to my website. I'm going to be doing a virtual booth tomorrow and Sunday. So I'll be online for a few hours and I'll probably be working again, sort of like I demonstrated, because it's kind of a fun process, but I'll just do my quick shout out to myself. So if you want to follow me, I'm DarrenCJones.com. On Instagram, I'm Darren Jones Art. And on Facebook, I'm Darren Jones Studio, or just Darren Jones, but I'm in Chicago, so you'll see that. They're both linked together. So yeah, so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, this has been a real treat. And not the same as being around the square, but it's kind of fun to connect with everybody on the East Coast.
Yeah, we're trying our best to keep those connections going. And
yeah,
this has been an amazing presentation. Just to let people know, we are going to be sharing this like on our YouTube, and we'll make this accessible to Darren so he can share it with others as well. So
that'd be great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, and I hope you have an amazing weekend.
Thanks, I do too. I hope you guys enjoy, and always feel free to email me if you ever have any questions, and enjoy your weekend.